The guys clinked glasses, and the hero told him that the previous evening there was a celebration for his retirement. Sitting at the table with his buddies, he remarked that he was just a bank worker, so there weren't many guests. A few pals came, gave him presents, and they drank. He pictured the buildings and noted that the cash he had saved over 20 years of tough work and the property listed in his name were with him. All that remained was to spend his final days calmly. The hero lifted his head, sitting on the bed. He declared that this wasn't the same world. Holding his head, he said that he woke up in the student dorm where he stayed 20 years ago. Gripping the phone in his hands, the hero asked if it was 2018. He tossed the phone at the wall and yelled that this must be a prank. The shocked guy asked why he returned at this time of year, noting that he had just started a worry-free life. The hero clutched his head and kept asking why this had happened to him. The upset guy explained what he had done wrong. He looked away and asked to hold on. The hero glanced at his watch and said that it had been given to him as a gift, and then wondered why he was still wearing it. The hero recalled Jack telling him that this watch was very uncommon. Gossip said it was a treasure of a famous wizard of the land. Frowning, the guy asked if they had given it back to him, noting that he had been turning and examining it the previous night before going to sleep. Suddenly, someone began knocking on his door and asked why he was making a racket. Sighing, the hero recalled that there was a fool living next to him. He was the son of the owner of this dorm, so he acted like he was in charge there too. The hero remembered trying to sleep and told him that every time the guy held singing parties and drinking gatherings and then came to demand money from him while he was still half awake. The angry hero stated that the mere thought of him was driving him mad. The hero stepped out to him. He had a grin on his face. Looking at the guy, Rick noted that he was wearing pretty nice clothes. His jacket was made of beast skin. The guy said with a pleased look that he was already thinking about calling the cops, but he didn't want to ruin the life of such a young man. He would ignore his behavior if he gave him cash as payment. The guy reached for his watch and stated that this watch was worth just as much as needed. The hero suddenly scowled. Rick pushed the guy's hand away. His face was furious. The hero gave him a strong hit. Blood started to flow from the guy's nose. Rick grabbed his head. He struck him in the face with his knee. Looking at the hurt guy, the hero wondered why a skinny guy like him kept robbing the weak. Rick began to walk away from there and stressed that it wasn't enough payback for everything he took from him, but he would let him go anyway. The hero put his hand in his pocket. Closing his eyes, the hero said that he was leaving that place. Walking down the road, Rick thought that at first, it was unclear why he was sent back to 2018, but it was at this time that he woke up when an accident happened at a building site when he hurt his knee, which then caused him pain for the rest of his life. The hero surrounded his body and energy and noted that it was time to wake up. The power spread through his body, and he remarked that he had been controlling energy for 20 years, so it wouldn't be hard. Clenching his hand into a fist, Rick began to think that he wasn't eating well and lacked muscle, after which he asked how one could even go to work with such a body. Taking a step back, the hero said that he needed to grab a bite first. Looking around the town, Rick noted that there was a building site everywhere. Frowning, the hero remarked that he understood why no one noticed how the small gate opened, because many folks died there due to the sudden arrival of creatures. The hero was suddenly shocked. There was a portal outside, and people started shouting that there would be creatures there and they needed to call the cops. The hero's gaze fell on the creature, and he read that it was a wild red dog with spots, a beast with sharp teeth that lived in a group. The old man touched Rick's shoulder and shouted that he should run. Taking off his backpack, the hero said that he had returned to a terrible moment in time. He looked at the construction workers and wondered where he could find a weapon. The hero grabbed a crowbar with quick speed. He turned his gaze to the screen. 3 wolves surrounded a little girl. They charged at her. Rick suddenly managed to pull her away. The hero covered her with himself and asked her to run to her dad. The wolves charged at him. Rick swung the crowbar. He gave a strong hit to the creature. The wolf cried out in pain. The hero kept swinging the crowbar. He struck the dog in the face. The hero took the crowbar in both hands. Rick dealt another hit. He began to yell with a serious face. The wolf flew away from his hit. The hero was suddenly surprised. Standing in front of the creatures, Rick said that he was hungry, then asked why there were so many of them. The creatures suddenly became scared. The hero's mouth was watering as he said that they were so fat and looked tasty. The wolves backed away. The hero pictured a pot and thought that he remembered eating their meat. And it was delicious. Holding the crowbar in front of him, Rick said that this was great. The town would help deal with them faster. The hero rushed past the creatures, attacking them, and thought that although he had become 20 years younger, at that age he didn't have such good skills as at 40. Dodging a wolf, Rick stressed that his knees didn't hurt at all. He jumped behind the creature. The hero landed on the wolf's head. The hero noticed another wolf behind him. Dodging a bite, Rick thought that there was no end to them. One crowbar wouldn't be enough to handle them all. He put his watch on his fingers like brass knuckles. The hero struck the wolf in the face. The hero looked at the watch and thought that it was very sturdy. Rick stood surrounded by wolves and asked how many were left. He grinned at the voice that said that the cops had arrived. The hero saw that the sleeve of his jacket was ripped. Disappointed, Rick noted that it had torn the first time he wore it. The cop, smiling, thanked the hero for saving those folks, and then asked him to state his name and workplace so that they could send him a reward. The man began to write down the hero's name in a notebook. Holding the back of his head, Rick said that he hadn't yet been registered as a superhuman either. He had only awakened a couple of hours ago. He offered to give his number and bank details with a pleased look. Closing his eyes, the hero said that he would go because he had things to do. Looking after Rick, the man shouted that he still had to question them. Running away from there, the hero thought that his name and number would be enough for them to contact him. Rick pictured the surprised folks who said that they had found a new awakened person. They put beef soup on the table for him. Rick began to eat, holding a spoon in his mouth. The hero said that it was tasty. The hero looked at his vibrating phone. Touching his phone, he thought that everyone was looking to hire superhumans now, and they saw how skilled he was despite his recent awakening. Rick looked at the date on his phone, thought that if it was 2018, then it had been 2 years since the last gate appeared. The hero pictured a man being showered with coins and noted that it was then that superhumans with energy and special skills began to replace the cops and army, and guilds came to power. Every time a new superhuman appeared, everyone began to compete for him. Holding a spoon in his mouth, Rick said that this is the time he returned to. Raising his head, he thought that there were many criminal superhumans now, and until now, there was no plan for handling the arrival of creatures because some of the 6 disasters were already coming. He had no choice. The hero held up 3 fingers and said that he would use his knowledge of the future to retire in just 3 years and make sure it goes well. Rick said with a pleased look that the messages didn't stop coming. The man approached him from behind. Turning around, the hero asked who he was. The guy handed over a letter and introduced himself as Kyle, the manager of the ruling family's guild. The car pulled up to a cafe where Kyle said that after watching the video of Rick beating creatures, he immediately wanted to meet him. The girl entered then. She said with a grin on her face that the main character looks even more impressive in real life. The man with a grin on his face said that he was from the Warriors Guild. A crowd of guys tried to get to Rick. The hero looked at them with an annoyed look. His face suddenly became serious. Sitting in front of the people, Rick said that if they said one more word, he wouldn't join anyone for any amount of cash. Sitting in front of the people, the hero asked if it would be better for them to talk somewhere else. Rick was sitting at the table, sipping tea. The hero said that he wouldn't take up much of their time. Looking at the guys, the hero asked how big a bonus they could offer for signing the deal. Stretching out his hand, Kyle said that there were terms in the deal that couldn't be shared, after which he suggested listening to them in turn. Rick ate cake and asked if Kyle was from the ruling family's guild. Closing his eyes, Kyle answered that their guild was respected and had a 1.5 years of history, and the hero wished him a safe trip home. Stunned, Kyle asked again, and the hero answered that he didn't plan to sign a deal with them, after which he wondered why he would join a guild with such bad management, especially since it was soon to merge with another. Rick turned his gaze to the other managers and asked how long he should wait for the next offer. The shocked guy shouted that they were offering him 1 billion won. The scared people began to offer more cash. While drinking tea, the hero wondered how much the Black Hounds would offer him since he was with them before returning in time. Chloe put down the cup and said that they were offering 2 billion as well as a better salary, benefits, and missions for getting items. Their terms were the most favorable. Folding her arms, she noted that no one would treat him like this anywhere else, and the story told us that this was the manager of the White House Guild. The hero showed the guild's crest and thought that the White House was recently founded, but in 3 years it would become one of the 3 best in Korea. Smiling, Rick suggested that this was the reason for their tough approach. Looking at the girl, the hero asked everyone except her to leave, noting that they could leave him their business cards just in case. Chloe sat quietly opposite him. She closed her eyes and said that on the way there, she watched the video of his fight several times. His skills are amazing, and only yesterday, he was an ordinary person. Smiling, the hero thought that this was a classy way to show that she made inquiries about him. Chloe put the papers on the table and said that she was sure that Rick was either a genius or received traits that gave him an edge in combat. Smiling, the girls stressed that they would like to nurture his talent for the future White House. Looking at the papers, the hero thought that in his past life, he couldn't even dream of such an offer, after which he asked if Chloe would mind if he added a few terms. Chloe sat in front of him quietly. She looked at Rick and listened to his terms. The girl laughed and said that he was a big joker. Pointing his finger at the papers, the hero said that he wanted a 4-day work week and a time limit to the workday, the right to refuse tasks that take a long time to finish. Chloe, angry, replied that it was definitely a prank. The hero, with a serious face, stated that these were his terms. Holding her chin, the girl asked where he got so much confidence from. Looking at her, Rick said that she wouldn't regret it if they signed the deal. Chloe got up from the table, smiling. She said that she would review the terms again and come to him in a couple of days. She winked at the hero and asked if he would mind meeting for drinks instead of coffee next time. The hero sat quietly at the table. Holding his face, the hero thought that this wouldn't affect him. She thought he didn't know that her dad was the guild leader. Rick got up from the table and noted that he would go register as a superhuman. The hero arrived at the Disaster Control Center, Korean branch. He was standing in the superhuman support room where the girl was telling him that the person in charge was away at the moment, and that she was new there and couldn't handle it herself. Standing in front of her, Rick asked if they could figure out something if he was in a hurry, and the girl replied that she would try to contact her boss. Closing his eyes, the hero thought that he needed to quickly settle everything there and leave. Standing in front of her, the hero told her that he uses physical strength, but he has no skills. Holding on to the strap of his backpack, Rick noted that no one believes in the existence of magic now, so they can only find out about his abilities if he shows them himself. But in this life, he won't do that. They came to a room in which the hero was asked to first lift a barbell. Rick's hand was surrounded in blue energy. He lifted the barbell over his head with one hand. The surprised girl said that the hero really is a superhuman, after which she suggested continuing. The girl gave the hero a temporary superhuman certificate. Standing in front of her, Rick listened to her say that they would contact him soon when the official certificate was ready. The hero was surprised by what he heard. The hero walked towards the guy and thought that it would be better to avoid him. Looking at him, Rick thought that this was Jimmy from the Superhuman Support Service. Nothing good could be expected from him. Closing his eyes, the hero noted that he would try to never come there again. Jimmy approached the girl and asked if this was a new superhuman, to which he received the answer that it was Rick, whom she told him about on the phone. Turning around, Jimmy called him a supernab. The hero walked through the pollution control zone and noted that it was closed, ruined, and abandoned because of creatures, but everything would change when the spatial gates opened. The hero introduced 2 planets and told us that the continent of Gaia is a fantasy world where swords and magic exist. In a year, its spatial gates will open on Earth and humanity will meet a new civilization. Stopping, Rick said that in Korea, only one gate will open there in the control zone. The hero shouted with excitement that as soon as he was paid a bonus for signing the deal, he needed to buy this place. When the gates opened, he would get rich. He began to take things out of his backpack and said that he would now unpack his stuff and go hunt creatures. Surprised, the hero heard a shout that he needed to leave or die. Looking out of the capsule, Rick wondered if this was the language of the people of Gaia. His face was serious. His legs were surrounded in blue energy. The hero jumped over the fence and thought that by blending in with the surroundings, he could hide his presence. It was because of this skill that he was sent on risky missions of scouting, spying, and secret killing. Moving at great speed, Rick noted that he wouldn't fall for this again. Frowning, the hero wondered if someone was following her. The girl stood in front of the guys and yelled that she warned them. She focused energy in her hands and said that they asked for it. The shocked guys shouted that superpowers are awesome. The girl was surprised by the words that they would pay for her as much as they ask. Rick watched her and thought that she spoke the language of Gaia and used its superpowers. Of all people, she was unlucky enough to stumble upon slave traders. Stretching out his hand, the guy asked the girl to give up and go to them, and they will buy her food. The hero was shocked when he saw the man's tattoo. Examining it, the hero stressed that members of the Red Snake criminal group wear it. Rick landed on the ground and thought that he had some energy left until he stopped using concealment. He hadn't met the people of Gaia for a long time. In his hand was a knife. The hero pierced the bandit's chest with a knife. The blade was covered in blood. Rick killed the remaining guys. The girl was shocked by what she saw. She stood in front of the hero. Looking at her, the hero asked if she was from the Gaia continent, adding that he had a question. Surprised, the stranger asked if he could speak their language. Rick cleaned the knife from the blood. He asked with a serious face if she liked meat. The girl, with a joyful face, thanked him for saving her, after which she promised that one day she would repay. Standing in front of her, the hero asked how many servings he could eat. The stranger was surprised by the question of whether she had crossed the dimensional gate alone. Rick held out his hand and asked where she had been before, where her home was. Lily hung her head and said she didn't want to tell him anything. Sitting in front of her, the hero thought that he hadn't learned anything in the end, and Lily asked him to help her. Frowning, she told him that she knew nothing about this place, couldn't talk to anyone, and had almost no strength left. Lily gathered energy in her hands and said that she could use fire, but it didn't work out very well. Her face was sad. Crossing his arms, the hero replied that he was busy, that being a caretaker was hard, and that he must have a reason to take care of her. Rick said with a serious expression that he was giving her a month. That's how long she could stay there. He would teach her their language and give her basic knowledge. In exchange, she would do the chores and run his errands. Lily was confused by this. She asked with joy if she could really stay there. The hero gave her the dishes and asked her to wash them. The girl happily said that she hoped they would get along. Rick pointed his finger and showed her where to wash the dishes. The hero began to think about Lily, who uses fire, and noted that this couldn't be true. The hero pictured the girl and concluded that the creature that would burn half of Sela in 10 years had flame, colored hair, and the ability to control fire. Her name was Lily, and she came from the continent of Gaia, this fire witch, one of the 6 disasters. Rick, holding his chin, reasoned that the girl was very similar to him. They were practically like 2 peas in a pod. Watching her, the hero thought that as far as he knew, the fire witch was kidnapped as a child by a criminal group and raised to be someone who would cause a disaster, after which he stressed that he would be able to stop one of the 6 disasters. Lily followed the hero and asked where they were. Rick answered with a serious look that they were at the market. He would cook a special lunch for her today. Checking the meat, the hero asked the seller if he had a predator fillet. The hero showed various items and told us that after the opening of the first spatial gate, a food shortage began and people switched to creature meat. Now the supply exceeds the demand because no one has yet realized its usefulness, which lies in the richness of meat with energy. In the future, we can't live without it. Rick checked various products. The hero carried bags of food and thought that her appearance brings out sympathy in everyone, so they gave them too much. Surprised, Lily asked if she really could pick her clothes. The girl looked at the suit and shouted that she wanted it. Rick's face was serious. The guy dressed her in a tracksuit. Sighing, the hero said that such clothes are just right for walking around the dump. The hero put the frying pan on the table and said that today's special dish, filled with energy, was for dinner. Sitting at the table, Lily asked if they would eat it, to which Rick replied that healthy food always looked like that. The surprised girl said that it smelled tasty. Holding the box in his hands, the hero said that he took the chicken for later, but he thought that they could eat it now. Lily began to eat. She was thrilled. The joyful girl began to shout that the food couldn't be so delicious. From now on, she would only eat chicken. The angry hero asked her to eat the rest, otherwise he would throw it in the soup too. Rick began to eat the soup and said that Lily was too picky. It was quite edible, and in his mind, he noted that it wasn't so. Just a little more, and he could die. Sitting at the table, the hero concluded that if he hadn't returned to the past, he would now be ordering treats in a restaurant. Looking at the remains, Lily said that her tongue had gone numb. Standing in front of her, Rick ordered her to wash the dishes and sit down to read a book, and he shouldn't be disturbed. The hero began to meditate. He pictured the outline of a person and thought that this was the technique of the Great Sea of Mind. It boosts magical power and allows you to use it more skillfully. Covered in blue energy, the guy thought that before returning, he trained this technique. Energy grows faster than expected. Rick pictured clumps of energy and stressed that in the past, no matter how much effort he put in, there was no such effect. He feels how his energy center grows in size. Grinning, the hero said that if he continues to eat food rich in energy and master the technique of the mind, he will become even stronger than last time. He stood up and noted that it was time for him to finish, after which he wondered why his stomach was already growling. Excited, Lily asked if Rick was hungry and if he wanted chicken. The hero turned around with a confused look. Sitting at the table, the girl shouted that she hated soup. 2 days later, the hero checked his body and noted that this was an amazing result in such a short time. With the current level, you can even go treasure hunting. His phone began to vibrate. Putting the phone to her ear, Chloe said that she was a little disappointed. She thought Rick would call first, after which she asked if he cared about how she was doing. Frowning, The hero replied that he had things to do and asked how the review of the contract terms was going. Chloe quietly held the phone, after which the hero asked if she had any problems, after which she said that she managed to convince their leader. He would hire him if he proved that he was capable. Frowning, Rick asked if they wanted to hold an interview. Smiling, the hero said that he agreed. He came to the headquarters of the Guild White House. Chloe greeted Lily with a grin, and the hero said that she was his half-sister. Lily looked at the girl with excitement, and Rick said that she lived abroad, so she doesn't speak Korean well. He will have to take her everywhere with him for some time due to unexpected events. Lily showed the cash and thought that this meant that Chloe was a very nice person. Holding her hands behind her back, Chloe asked not to worry because their guild doesn't interfere in the personal lives of its members. The man greeted her with a pleased look and said that his name was Bill, and the story told us that this was the head of the White House Guild. He shook Rick's hand and said that they were supposed to visit him first, but business got in the way. He hoped for his understanding, after which the hero replied that everything was fine, they would consider that he came there on a tour. Standing in front of the hero, Bill stated that he was told that he had added a new term to double the amount stated in the deal if he passed the test. Yellow energy began to surround his body. Surrounded by energy, Bill wondered if he was really worth that much cash. Frowning, Rick thought that he was sure that he had no fighting skills or magic, and yet he was able to create powerful energy with his energy. A creature was a creature anyway. If it were another superhuman, he wouldn't have said a word. Lily watched them with fear. Smiling, the hero said that he would prove his worth to him. Bill was shocked by this. He turned his gaze to Chloe and asked her to rewrite the deal. Closing his eyes, Bill said that they would triple the amount stated, and they would also add a term that he would receive 20 billion won if he passed the test and signed the deal. The hero grinned and said that Bill was a ferryman and was ready to start the test right now. Standing in the underground training grounds of the White House, Bill said that the test would be considered passed if he beat 3 members of their guild. Since this wasn't a real fight, they had to try not to harm each other. He looked at the guy and noted that this was Rick's first opponent. His name was John. Despite his young age, he was a member of the first guild union. The hero put a watch on his fingers and said that he didn't need a weapon, and this watch would be more than enough. Angry John thought that Rick had awakened not so long ago and wanted to fight for hours. Standing between them, Bill said that they could begin the fight. Angry, John said that he would finish him. Standing opposite, the hero wondered what was wrong with him. John rushed into battle, and the hero thought that he had only read about this guy in a magazine. His skill was speed. He had the ability to become faster the more he moved without stopping. Rick stood still and decided that he needed to beat him fast before he got even quicker. John dashed around the hero. Scowling, the hero said that he thought he'd strike straight. But that wasn't true. The fellows observed the battle and talked about how John had sped up too much. It was pretty tough to beat a member of the primary group. It was finished, but at least Rick was courageous. Chloe was frightened. The hero spotted John, who declared that he'd end him. John charged at him. The hero's face was stern. Rick punched the fellow in the face and figured that the one who dropped his defense was the simplest to overcome. Scowling, the hero remarked that he wasn't permitted to hit him because his swiftness also acted against him. Lily shouted joyfully that it was a win. Rick spun around and asked who was next. Bill offered his hand to the fellow and said that the hero was incredible. He pictured John in bed and stated that his life wasn't at risk, the medics would look after him, and he'd heal in a few days of rest. Grinning, the man said that it was great that he had held back his strength. Rick smirked, asking if it truly appeared that way to him, and thought that if he hadn't managed his power, his head would have soared off his shoulders, which didn't go unseen. Glancing at the balcony with the fellows, the hero thought that he was now surely promised 6 billion under the deal. He already fulfilled their demands. The fellow beamed, and thought that they'd enjoy themselves until the end of the challenge. Lily gazed at him in shock, and asked why he was grinning like an idiot. The story shifts to a practice area in a man-made forest where a girl stood with the fellows and said that in the White House, there were 2 groups of 6 squads, each with 5 members. Showing the emblem, she said that his next rival was the head of the 6th squad of the first group. Riley stretched out his hand and said that he wished for a fair fight. Picturing the fellows on the balcony, Rick thought that he was one of those who aimed to destroy him. The hero lifted his fists and said that he was prepared. The rival drew his blade and replied that he was too. The bell sounded. The hero rushed toward the fellow. He swung his timepiece. Riley blocked the strike with his shield. Rick evaded the blade swing. The rival grinned and thought that this was his moment. Having swung his shield, he figured that he could toss it. The hero dashed around him. The fellow extended his fingers, triggering the hawk's talons. The rival shielded himself, wondering if he had learned combat skills before awakening. He swung his blade. The hero nimbly dodged the strike. Rick charged into him with his body, shoving him with his back. The fellow activated the iron peak. Riley spun around, anxious. He soared into the depths of the woods. The hero stood there, unhappy. The hero watched as the rival said that he was quite powerful and thought that his physical stamina was no laughing matter. Scowling, Rick pondered how he planned to conceal his skills until the final rival. He glanced at the cheerful Bill, wondering what this sly fox wanted him to reveal. Raising his hand, Riley said that he'd request to join his squad. He thought they'd cooperate well together. The hero looked at him, displeased, and asked who decides this. The rival pointed his blade at the leader and asked if the victor really decides this. The man nodded and agreed. Looking away, the main character said that he'd become the head of the squad if he beat him. The fellows watched him from the balcony and chatted that this was some kind of absurdity, too much thrill. Rick stood before the man, saying that he'd form his own squad and enlist people. They'd perform tasks on their own. Thinking that at first he wanted to slowly build up to this after showing his skills, but why wait if he'd defeat the current leader anyway? Bill looked serious and said that he agreed. Frowning, he said that if the fellow loses, he'd cut the bonus for signing the deal by half and double its length. Riley stood before him and asked if he was certain that he'd beat him. Rick gazed at the stunned enemy and said that he likes Chloe. He dreams of finishing him off because she shows curiosity in him. Does he really believe that winning will give him the right to act proudly toward him? Picturing a room with a picture of a girl, he thought about how the rival would become a very debatable figure soon. He'd have to endure all sorts of shame and eventually be kicked out of the guild and told to at least tidy up the room. The fellows watched from behind the shrubs as Riley yelled to close his mouth. The hero watched as he gripped his fist and said that he'd show what a leader is made of, thinking that this was the buffalo mode, which is triggered when he loses his temper, in which his energy and physical stats boost. The fellow charged forward. The hero held out his timepiece, using the vast ocean of mind method. Rick swung his fist, saying that he suggests blocking it with a shield. He landed a strong hit on the shield. Bill watched in astonishment. Looking at the seated Riley, he said that the newcomer really beat him. Sitting on the ground, the hero said that his entire body ached, how tough it is to earn cash. Glancing at his timepiece, the fellow thought about how frail his body was. He couldn't believe that he'd lost so much power after just one strike from a lightning fist. Rick sat surrounded by energy, thinking about how he needed to heal with a mind method. His strength would be useful in the next bout. He scowled. Chloe approached him and cheerfully said that he was now the leader of the 7th squad. Smiling, the hero replied that it sounded nice. The fellow clutched his lower back, thinking about how, per the deal, beating 2 rivals adds another billion to him. Now he can target all 20. He stood before the girl and asked who his final rival was. Adjusting his collar, Bill said that it was him. He didn't expect that he'd beat Commander Riley. The man gripped his fist and said that he had no option. He'd have to fight the last battle himself. The hero looked at him with worry, wondering if he really had to battle this beast. He glanced at the shocked leader and said that he was quitting. Bill grabbed him by the shoulder and said that he'd offer him 20 billion for just 5 minutes of battling, or, better yet, 3 billion for every 3 minutes, to which the fellow replied that he couldn't fight anymore. Chloe smiled kindly and said that it was time to finally sign the agreement. A window popped up with details that the agreement was signed. The hero looked at the documents and said that these terms were very favorable. He hoped that they'd collaborate. He sat at the table in front of the girl and asked if he could already sign deals with others. Touching Lily's chair, Rick said that with those who weren't part of any guild and were very skilled. The girl turned around in puzzlement. She held a pen in surprise and listened that she should create as large a blaze as she could. Lily sighed and replied that she was starving. The girl frowned when she heard that he'd purchased 3 chickens. She dashed around the room and shouted that he had promised. Lily raised a huge blaze above herself and said that she wanted 3 chickens. Covering her mouth with her hand, Chloe asked if his sister was also a superhuman, to which he replied that this was why he wanted to recruit her into his squad. The hero watched the blaze, thinking that fire didn't burn objects, which meant that she had perfect mastery over the ability, which was surprising because he had only coached her for a few days. In her past life, she had become a catastrophe for a reason. Rick picked up the paper and said that they needed to discuss Lily's contract fee. They'd begin with 3 billion. The angry girl stood behind him and asked what was happening with the chicken. She joyfully held the chicken legs, and the system reported that her contract fee was 5 billion. The hero looked at the skyscraper and thought about how the White House owned this structure. Its big company had enough regular staff to manage the practice halls, living spaces, control areas, and more. The hero walked with the fellows along the hallway and said that he wasn't one of those who could be shocked by the idea that the gear was outdated compared to what he saw in the future. Entering the lab, he said that this place was remarkable. Chloe pointed at the weapon and said that this was a workshop for building equipment. If he needed anything, they'd complete the order in a week. Picking up the knives, Rick thought that this would suffice for now and answered that for now he'd use these blades. The fellow grabbed his jacket and asked if they were finished with the tour yet. Turning around, the girl said that since this was his first day, it would conclude after the meeting with the boss. Bill extended his hand and said that there was an urgent message from the control area. All squads were currently on tasks, so he was in a tough spot, apologized for asking him about this on the first day, but wanted him to go on a task. The hero looked unhappy and thought that he had hoped to leave work early today. The hero asked with a serious expression where to go. Looking at the portal with creatures, Rick said that the portal was 10 meters above the ground, and huge slimes were crawling out of it in large numbers. The fellow shielded himself from the slime. The hero stood behind him with a girl and said that it seemed that most of the creatures had already been handled. Maybe they shouldn't meddle, they looked feeble. He held the phone to his ear, hearing them say that they needed a sample of these new creatures. Let them bring at least 3 and try to keep their original form as much as possible. Looking at the creature, the fellow thought that these were huge, smelly slugs. They were weak but burst on impact and splashed out stinking goo. Lily raised her hands in panic and asked if they really needed to battle them, to which the fellow replied that he blocked his sense of smell with energy. Pointing his finger forward, Rick said that it would hardly succeed the first time, but with practice he could. The girl happily clenched her fists and said that it worked. She no longer sensed anything. The hero watched as people gathered the goo, thinking that no one had managed to get a good sample. They burst even from a small amount of energy, and attacks without energy don't work on them. Pushing off the ground, he decided that it was time to catch samples. The fellow noticed a slug on a tree. The hero kicked the trunk. The creature jumped on him. Rick hit it with his hand. The hero tossed the slug aside. The creature spun quickly. It fell to the ground. Lily watched as the fellow put it in a bag and asked how he did it. Let him teach her. Rick scowled and said that he'd teach her for 100 billion, thinking that she wanted to spend all his cash. Chloe put her hand to the earpiece, hearing that the samples were collected. All 3 were with them. They'd hand them over to the collection squad and finish the job for today. The hero stood with a bag on the street, saying that there was nothing to fret about. When they arrived, the others had almost everything sorted out. He turned around, hearing the man ask if he was from the White House. Chuck was walking toward him on the road and said that he hadn't seen him before. He looked like a fresh recruit. Looking at the hero's arm, he said that he heard that they hired someone. Judging by the shoulder bandage, he was a leader, asking if they didn't have enough people, if they were putting a newbie in charge. The man crossed his arms and asked if the move he used was his skill. Scowling, Rick said that he had enough talk, specifying what he wanted. Lily nervously held the bag, hearing how those slimes always burst, and they were unable to gather normal samples. The hero looked at him sternly and said that he refused to share with them. Chuck smirked, asking if he really would refuse. How old was he? Why was he speaking to him so casually? The member of the ruling family's guild approached the fellow and told him to think for himself. They'd have to meet often on the battlefield, so it was better to help each other improve. Chloe held the phone to his ear angrily and told him not to give in to them. She'd file a formal grievance with the leader. Looking at the bag in his hand, the hero thought that he had been through this many times. If he didn't share, they'd try to take the bag by force. He tossed the bag aside and told them to take it. Rick listened with a smirk as the man said that he would have done so instantly. The hero approached the slime sitting on the bag. The fellow told him to take it if they could. The other guild member scowled and objected that he was trying to negotiate. Gripping his fist, Chuck asked if he wanted to handle this differently. The hero sat in front of the girl and whispered to her that when he gave the signal, she should ignite everything, let them worry. Taking a step back, Lily asked if she really should burn them. The fellow looked at him sternly and replied that in that case, they'd have no issues later. Only the earth, thinking that he wouldn't let it become a catastrophe. Chuck pointed at him with his hand and shouted that as an elder, he'd teach him a lesson. Looking at the glowing portal, he asked what was wrong with it. A slug emerged from the gate. Scowling, the man yelled for everyone to prepare to fight. People swiftly ran down the street. A huge snail appeared on the ground. The fellow watched as Rick dragged a bag and said that if he got hit, he should blame himself. Walking down the street with the girl, the hero said that they'd take the bags to the vehicle. The fellows battled the creature and asked why it didn't cut itself. Where did it get so much power from? The fellow stood in front of the slug and shouted that first it was necessary to slice off the tentacles. The hero stood near the trunk, hearing the girls say that he should go fight. He smirked when he heard that they only needed one hit to claim the prize, and replied that he didn't have to fret. Rick turned around and said that they'd never beat him like that. The leader dodged the creature's strikes and shouted that the tanks should handle the tentacles first because its goo dissolves shields. Grabbing his arm, Chuck said that the tanks should retreat for now and prepare to strike from afar. The fellow ran down the street and shouted that he wasn't like those tiny slimes. Lily sat in the trunk and asked how long they'd watch this, to which the hero replied that until they all left. Charlie ran down the street, hearing people yell at him to hurry up. He ran with all his strength and asked for forgiveness. Picking up his shattered blade, the fellow said that all his weapons had been corroded. The creature moved down the street after the people. Charlie ran in fear, hearing how he should use his skills to escape. The tentacles wrapped around his body, and he said he couldn't. The slug lifted the fellow's body. Having sliced the tentacle, Rick asked if they really called themselves his allies. The hero stood in front of the injured creature. Having fallen to the ground, Charlie thanked him. The hero turned around and said that this wasn't how he should use his skills. He looked at the lying fellow and said that if he wanted to know how to do it right, he should find him after the battle. Rick stood in front of the girl and said that they were starting. The fellows looked at the flames and asked where so much fire had suddenly appeared from. The hero stood in the flames. Hearing through his earpiece that the support squad would arrive in 5 minutes, he should wait for them and fight together, and said that help would come to the others too. It'd be better to take all the prize for himself. Chloe watched the drone in the sky and told him that the fire was making it hard for him to approach. He needed to be taken away. Scowling, she shouted that they didn't care about all the prize. It was too risky. The hero touched his earpiece and replied that he shouldn't fret. He'd beat him and return safely. Picturing a book with a snail, Rick thought that this was an unusually fierce creature. So there was an entry about it in an illustrated guide. It was vital to recall the strategy for beating creatures in an emergency. He stood in front of the creature on the road, thinking that fire was its weakness. It definitely slowed down after they started it. The fellow ran ahead, asking Lily to shield him. The hero ran swiftly, thinking that the tentacles were regrowing. He was recovering fast. He'd need the girl's help. The hero ran past the creature and said that it was time to act. Lily stretched out her hand with a blaze. The fairy shots hit the tentacles. Rick ran in front of the girl and said that everything was fine. They were continuing. The severed limbs lay in the goo. The fellow pictured a wounded snail, thinking that when most of the tentacles were sliced off, it would hide in its shell to heal. The hero pictured a hidden creature. Standing in front of the creature, Rick thought about how the guide said that it even blocks the passage. The hero looked at the blade and said that they'd use what they took from the vehicle. Imagining the creature's armor, the boy believed it was extremely tough, so they had to target various spots. He neared the armor with the point. The hero thrust the sword into the creature. Lily observed him swing the knife and remarked it was dull. Staring at the fire, the man questioned what they were doing there. Charlie stood gloomily, recalling how the hero stated he shouldn't use his powers like that, and wondered if he was being honest. Rick exhaled with a grin, standing before the pierced armor. The boy declared it was time to proceed to the final phase. He gazed at the pierced armor and considered the spikes driven in. Now he must aim for the middle. He must deliver the strongest hit he can now. The hero touched the armor, swinging his hand. Rick used the vast ocean of thought method, the thunder punch. The boy landed a mighty strike. He shut his eyes. The spikes in the armor started to glow. The snail armor split open. The hero clutched his aching arm, lying on the path. The hero reflected on how during the trial he thought using this method twice would be excessive, but his body is so frail he cannot execute any properly. Lily nudged him in panic, asking if he was shocked, to which he responded she was meant to assist him. Kneeling, Rick said he believed they had defeated him. Let him maintain the barrier a bit longer. They were trying very hard, so they'd take all the treasure for themselves. The boy tossed chunks of goo into the sack and told the girl its flesh was very tender and full of nutrients. He held the blade to his neck and considered it was the ideal component for a healthy manegu. Scowling, the hero listened through the earphones as the leader of the second group said he'd been told of his situation. They'd soon arrive to aid. The hero touched the earpiece and said they should come after he removed the barrier. Slicing the tendrils, Rick thought he hadn't yet taken the most crucial thing, and heard that the two of them must find it tough to resist the goo. After all, it was their first day at work, so let him not overdo it. The hero grabbed the creature's flesh and asked the girl to extinguish the blaze. The boys watched as the flames vanished. Brock pointed his finger and asked if they had beaten it alone. Grinning, the hero replied he had battled to the end. Luckily, he had been fortunate. A stunned Chuck stood before his peers and asked how he managed to do what none of them could. Rick grasped his shoulder and asked Brock if he could leave the cleanup to them, to which Brock agreed. The boy walked away calmly, hearing that if he was badly hurt, he should return to base where he'd be cared for. Looking at the shadowy street, the hero told the girl she had also worked hard today. He gazed at the plenty of food and suggested she eat her fill. Lily clasped her hands in joy and said this wasn't a dream. Picking up the chicken drumsticks, she shouted she wanted to go snail hunting again. The hero placed the mug of all on the table and said such a flavor was worth living for, darn it. The stunned girl ate the meat, thinking he said that every time he ate. Rick watched as she joyfully yelled, "Darn!" thinking it wasn't for nothing that they say you need to watch your words around kids. Wiping his mouth, the boy said it was a bad word. She shouldn't use it. He can, but she can't. All the structures were covered with plants. The hero meditated and thought he had been using the vast ocean of logic method for a long time, but it was still harming him. Then he focused his gaze and added that, although what else could one expect after yesterday's drinking, this method rather works as urgent help. It wasn't worth getting drunk. Rick stared at the phone and asked how many calls he had gotten that morning. Then he lifted the phone to his ear and heard why he didn't answer. The girl opened her mouth. Heard his muscles ache so much he was still just resting. He had overworked himself yesterday and asked if he felt better. The hero began to walk through the ruins and said not really what she wanted, and Chloe replied she planned to actively gather people for his team, so she'd like to hear his thoughts. A screen with outlines appeared, and Rick said many people would be needed to manage the team groups for recording, support, and providing healthcare, as well as an operator who would connect with everyone from the control center. Chloe winked, and the hero added that even the assistants who would handle creating the schedule for the groups and doing paperwork. The hero gritted his teeth, thinking these people would impact the success of the team, and noted it would be better to pick them to his liking. The girl lowered her head and said he was skilled at judging people. Rick grew serious, heard that so be it. After all, it was she who hired him. If he didn't mind, they needed to call after lunch and said he'd like to take one superhuman. The boy rubbed the back of his head, and Rick added it was Charlie from the Blackhound Guild. Bill smiled and said to take 3 days off. The hero stared at the phone, noted he was a bit tired, and heard that Chloe told him everything. It was unlikely he'd be able to go on a mission until they assembled the whole team. Rick frowned and thought he wouldn't mind not going to work for a few days, and Bill said he should rest and not strain himself so much next time. He was the future of their guild. The hero opened his mouth and asked if she was hungry. He'd have a good rest. Lily smiled and asked if they were going to eat, and Rick replied he'd cook something tasty. The hero presented the vegetables and noted that unlike the prior dish, this one was made from fresh and delicious ingredients with a soft feel, and even with the addition of snail heart, this was a special healthy manna dish. A moment later, there was ready soup in the pot, and the hero noted the color was odd, but it was nutritious food. Lily raised her hand and said she ate a lot of chicken yesterday and hadn't yet had time to get hungry, and Rick replied he was very sorry. Then the hero closed his eyes and noted it was darn tasty and rich. The hero grabbed the plate and noted he'd eat her portion too, and the girl shouted she would. Rick frowned and said he didn't want to. Lily put her head on the table and said she was so happy yesterday, and Rick asked her not to act out the drama because the world was full of delicious food. The girl clenched her teeth and asked how pork belly tasted, and Rick answered it was pricier than chicken. The girl put her hand on her chin and noted one could live for such a thing. Rick began to rub his hand and noted that to eat tasty food, she needed to improve her digestion. Let her follow him to hunt for riches. The eagle perched on a branch, and the hero said the creatures that survived after the opening of the first gate picked places to live. The orcs gripped the sword, and Rick added that the orcs, formed a tribe. On their land, there's a treasure from another world. 2 orcs stood near the statue. The hero looked through the binoculars and noted it was likely in that stone figure, but before going back in time, the exploration team found and took it, but this time he'd get there first. After which, he put away the binoculars and added there were about 200 orcs in the tribe. Thanks to the central crystal, his body was healed, but there were still too many for him alone. Rick stood from his knee and noted he'd sneak in there, and she'd start a fire when he gave a sign. Lily asked what sign they were talking about. The hero turned to her and said if the torch on the other side goes out, let her ignite the entrance. If she's distracted and misses the sign, she can forget about the treasure. The hero used invisibility. Lily stared at the hero. Rick passed the guards and thought no one among them could spot him unless a stronger foe appeared. The orc stood near the statue, and Rick thought the statue was protected by 10 orcs. Then he began to draw a knife and added he could handle them alone. The hero gripped the knife. Then he stared at the main orc and noted in his mind this was the chief of the tribe, a mutant orc. The warrior ripped his shirt, and the hero thought he showed incredible beastly power during the attack of the exploration team. The hero grabbed the crystal and noted in his mind this was a dangerous foe. It'd be better to stick to the plan. Then he tossed it into the fire pit. Lily watched from above and thought this was a sign. The orc stared at the fire in shock. The chief drew his weapon and ordered an attack. The hero turned his gaze and thought this was great. He'd use the situation to quickly destroy the statue. A moment later, a wave appeared before him. The chief was behind him, and Rick thought he had sensed him. Then he ran forward and added the orc was very powerful, and they needed to retreat. Rick ran through the crowd of orcs. Then he stared ahead and thought it was pointless to hide now. Lily looked at him and asked if they had spotted him, and Rick shouted for her to flee too. The dark sky was visible behind the leaves. The heroes sat in a small clearing. The hero scratched his head and thought they hadn't run long but were already worn out. Lily pointed to the cave and noted she knew this place. She came out of this cave when she passed through the gate. Then she opened her mouth and added those odd guys were there. They tried to catch her, so she fled. Rick pictured the emblem of the Red Snake clan and thought this was their hideout. Who'd have guessed they settled next to the orc tribe? Then he put his hand on the girl's head and thought if he used it right. The hero smiled and said they needed to go inside. Lily looked at him and asked if it was necessary. She didn't really want to. Rick raised his hand and told her to hide in those bushes and stay quiet and contact him if something happened. After which, he entered the cave. A moment later, the hero used invisibility. A guy sat on the floor, and Rick thought the Red Snake wasn't a small group. After which, he continued deeper into the cave and added that judging by the security, this really was their secret hideout. Why did they choose to settle near the orcs? The chemist stood behind the equipment, and Rick thought about what they were doing. After which, he stared at the worker and thought this was white powder. The hero turned around and thought it was a snake. Then he pictured the people near the package and said the snake was a drug made from plants from another world. In the past, many fell victim to addiction. They went mad and eventually died. The police spent years investigating, but to no avail. Who could have known they were hiding in such a place? Rick passed by the cooks and heard them hurry. If they don't meet the quota by tomorrow, they're done. And then he thought 100 armed members of the Red Snake group and about 30 drug makers. The hero turned to the packages and noted in his mind there were about 50 cages of snake, but he doesn't know its value in money, but it's definitely more than several trillion. One soldier stood before the boss and noted demand has risen recently. They have a shortage of supplies. Yesterday one fool died, so production speed has dropped. Rick turned his gaze, heard they were trying to take those who, even if they died, wouldn't drag them down, and noted in his mind they were caught. The guards turned in shock and shouted they couldn't see anything. Let him turn on the light. The snake was gone. The moon appeared in the night sky, and the hero asked where Lily was. The girl jumped from the bushes and asked if he was done, and Rick answered this was just the start. They'd play tag, let them get ready. Lily climbed into the box, and Rick noted there'd be many people chasing them. They just needed to avoid getting caught. It was risky, so she needed to stay quiet. The soldier ran from the bushes and shouted he was here. Let them catch this freak. And Rick said here are the catchers, let him hide inside. Then he turned with a smirk and noted he'd take the box. The hero began to dodge the bullets. Then he turned and thought they were chasing him. Rick stepped onto the ground. Then he opened his mouth and said he saw familiar faces. The orc chief drew his weapon and ordered an attack. The soldiers opened their mouths in shock. The hero ran forward and asked Lily to get out. Then he kicked the ground. Then he tossed the box up. The soldiers opened their mouths and shouted he was crazy. The orcs looked up in surprise. The box fell near the orc. The soldiers opened their mouths and shouted they needed to kill the creatures and take the snake, then they'd deal with this guy. A moment later, they opened fire, and the commander shouted they needed to shoot. The orc kicked the ground. Then he charged at the soldiers. Then he swung his sword. The hero knelt, heard when it'd be over. She wanted to eat, and replied it wasn't always easy to finish the task. Rick opened his mouth and added there wasn't much time left to wait, so was it worth starting a cleanup now? The trembling soldier looked at the orc and begged for mercy. The The chief raised his weapon and roared. Then he closed his eyes. Then a blade appeared in his chest, and Rick noted he had dealt with the scum well. The hero sharply pulled the blade from his chest. The orcs, shaking with fear, looked at the hero, and he noted in his mind the chief was dead, the rest wouldn't be a problem. Then they began to flee, and the hero added they'd follow him one by one. Rick hit the stone with a hammer, after which the statue fell. 2 decorations appeared, and the hero said this artifact helps heal and improve the wearer's condition. By using mana, it can activate a protective charm. The effect is stronger if both bracelets are worn. The hero stared at the bracelet and thought it had shrunk to his size. The mana he just used was restored, as shown in the description. Lily looked at it and asked if this was the treasure, and Rick asked her to come closer. Then he took her hand. Lily opened her eyes and asked why. Then she looked at the bracelet, heard it had a protective charm. An ordinary person wouldn't see it, and noted they had matching bracelets. Rick looked down with displeasure, thought she was still weak. Thanks to the bracelet, he could track her location, useful in case of danger, and noted he needed to eat dinner later. He still needed to return to the cave. Then he turned, heard the question why, and replied he'd explain later. Then he pointed at the tower and noted Lily should burn everything down. A moment later, the girl created a fireball. Then a huge flame appeared. The girl opened her mouth and shouted he wanted tasty food. Rick sweated and thought if he starved her, something might happen. The soldiers began to shoot and shout they needed to kill him. Rick summoned a shield and said to watch. It was created by the bracelet. Lily formed a shield and heard once she mastered it, she could shape it however she wanted. The girl waved her hand when she heard she just needed to hit them with the shield. The soldier fell to his knees and begged for mercy, saying he'd tell everything about their group. Rick gritted his teeth and noted he wasn't interested in that. He wanted to know where the safe was. An hour later, the heroes walked with their backs to the blast. Rick grinned and thought it was a good secret spot. Besides money, he got many items. Then he turned and added if she was done blowing everything up, the shield could be removed. And the girl asked if they'd run away. Rick looked at the soldiers and noted they had nowhere to flee. And then said there were about 35 Red Snake members and drug makers left. He wouldn't kill them. But he wouldn't let them go easily since they helped make the snake. Rick turned to the soldier and ordered them to follow him. The soldier scratched his head and asked why he was a rice cake with red beans. The hero opened his mouth and shouted because he looked like one. Lily would take him to his tent. Then he looked at the others and added the rest would go to the guard post and surrender.